I'm so honored to be introduced with a little countdown. Well, behind the
Little,
scenes,
yeah,
at least.
exactly. What I should do is probably not cut off your face too. So like I could show the poster first, right, and then we
Yeah,
go to
good
this.
stuff.
I'm really enjoying this whole having your own little television show. It's kind
Yeah,
of fun. So
brilliant.
greetings interwebs, as always. It's David Hewlett here, and today I'm really excited to be back with I'm with Genius, mainly because Konstantin here has got some interesting things to share, because I know that I struggle to live with a teenager in a fairly large house, so I can only imagine the kind of stuff you're dealing with, astronauts in space or in little tiny capsules under the water. But maybe, Konstantin, if you could just introduce yourself and let us know, what you do and why you're here.
Sure thing. So my name is Konstantin Chterev. I'm a psychologist by background, and I work in the extreme environment industry. So I work with people in the Arctic, the desert, and human spaceflight as well. And I look at a whole bunch of different things, such as group dynamics, the design of space stations.
Which are gorgeous, by the way. Oh my God.
Yeah, some of them, not all, but we can get into that.
Well, fugly. Some of them are fugly. I mean, there's that. Yeah.
And also just the selection and training of people who go to these environments as well. So that's me in a nutshell. And yeah, I can share a little bit more about my background and my journey if you're interested. But that's it encapsulated.
That's exactly it. I mean, I think it's always fun for people to know where things started. The astronaut selection thing is fascinating to me as well, because I just spoke to an astronaut who was like I guess he's about to become an astronaut. He's almost there, but he was.
Oh, the famous ass cans as they're known, or
is that what they're called?
Astronaut candidates, ass cans, like
oh my God, that's
the term
awful.
that NASA uses.
That is awful. One of the most engaging, lovely individuals I've ever met, and he pointed out something very interesting to me, which was that you don't have to be a genius. You don't have to know everything about everything. You have to know a little bit about everything, but more importantly, you have to be able to get along with people. And he had a kind of personality that you instantly got along with. Like it was almost an instinctive thing where I was like, I like this guy. I trust this guy. Like, and maybe you could speak to that at some point. But yeah, where did you start? Where did all this start for you?
So I'm a psychologist, right? So I have to blame it on my parents. Isn't that the classic
naturally? Yeah, true. So, that's true. Very good. Should have seen that coming.
No, it's the most obvious move in history. So I originally come from Bulgaria. You couldn't tell with his accent, but I immigrated to the UK when I was
Sofia. Where are you?
Varna. So that's on the East Coast.
On the East Coast. Oh, see, I've never been that far. I spent a fair amount of time in Sofia. What a crazy city.
Yeah, it's
like
brilliant.
Just nuts. Yeah,
it's a very different culture out there, especially comparing it to the UK culture.
Yeah, well, especially the closer you got to when they were they liberated, or did they break away? What was how did it work?
I mean, I'm not a history expert, but I think we broke away from the socialism in 1989.
Yeah. So the closer you got to that, the crazier the city was. Frankly, it sort of matured more as I've done.
Yeah, I mean, we joined Europe in the mid-2000s, 2006, 2007, and then we kind of stabled a little bit. But the 90s and 2000s, I mean, I was still young at that point. My parents tell me more stories there. It was a bit wackier. It was a bit trickier, tougher times, for sure. Understatement, I know. But, But they were massive space fans just from their childhood. I think part of the upbringing they had was a lot of focus on astronomy and the sciences. It was very much state-sponsored competitions and that kind of thing. And my parents partly met through their observation or astronomy club locally.
Oh, really?
So space was always a massive thing.
Astronomy love.
I know. Very cheesy. But it was always part of the family. Yeah. And then it was part of my upbringing as well when we moved here. So my dad would do observations in the garden. I would join in. Not that I understood everything when I was younger, but I liked it. It was very fascinating. And then
what sort of stuff were you doing? What was he doing that he could?
So he was doing like Venus transits and like observing the sun safely, of course.
Right.
Safety warning there, yeah.
Right.
And just we're watching a lot of sci-fi as well. They loved Stargate. I personally have to put my hands up.
Really?
Yeah, I didn't. I personally haven't watched it. It's on the list.
Apologies,
but I'll get there. But I know they're fans.
I actually said to Agnes, you don't. Please, you don't have to ask people whether they've watched the show or not. I feel like I don't want to feel like people have to watch it at all. So they were watching Stargate. What else? What was that? That was fairly recent though. So what's Well,
Yeah,
recent by
and
20 years or whatever it is.
yeah, and they love like Boris and Strugatsky, so like Russian sci-fi, reading that kind of stuff. They
Oh,
watched
wow.
Red Dwarf, if you know the UK
Oh, Red Dwarf.
series.
Yeah, Red Dwarf.
I remember watching that, and I still love it.
Yeah, that's fantastic. We met a few of them at a convention
Really,
in Prague.
they
I guess
seem like
last
lovely
year.
folks.
Oh my God, they're hilarious. Hilarious. You know, he DJs now. The
Which
lead
one?
guy he DJs as well. I can't remember his name.
Craig Charles? Not Craig
Yes,
Charles.
is that
Yeah,
Craig Charles?
Charles.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Amazing guy. Amazing.
Yeah.
Guy.
So we had that kind of stuff going on in the background, and of course Star Wars. More recently, Star Trek. And then as I was going to school,
did you have a preference on Star Trek? Which was the one you?
Deep Space Nine.
Really? Oh wow. Okay. All right. Yeah,
I was. I mean, I still love TNG. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah, I was TNG. That was my.
Yeah, I think both of them are
two
top. Yeah, both of those are top for me.
Right. I don't think I've seen much of that.
I would fully recommend it. I mean, again, because I work on like the design of
Ah,
stations for extreme environments.
right.
I love the idea of people living and working for long periods of time in space. That I just find that fascinating. So
well, and the how it messes with your head too. Like all those Solaris, all these wonderful films
Solaris
about messing with. I actually like the new one too. I gotta say, I know
is that the George Clooney one?
Yeah. I've just found it absolutely lovely. So that you think that's what inspired.
Definitely, yeah. And also like a love of gaming. There's a game called Spore. I don't know if you've ever played
that.
Yeah,
Spore. Yeah.
So for those in the crowd, essentially it's like the whole evolution cycle from like cellular up until like civilizations which span the galaxy.
Yeah.
And I was young. I really loved the game. So I think that also like triggered my love for exploration and space. So when I was in high school, I was okay at maths, but I realized I'm probably not going to be an engineer. But I always loved how humans interact with each other and the environment. That's like, I was very much like into the humanities and that kind of thing.
Right.
However, I still had the space interest. So I thought, how do I blend those two? So we have this thing in the UK. It's called an extended project qualification. And you just do a dissertation on anything you want. I think it's a brilliant idea. I'm not sure if they still do it or not, but I really
this is a prerequisite for finishing school?
Yeah, it was like high school kind of thing.
Right.
And I chose mine on space psychology, thinking it's an unexplored area.
Right.
And a Google search really quickly humbled me. There's been people doing this thing for decades. I mean,
it happens all the time. I'm always like, ooh, and then you realize people, dedicated their lives to it already.
No, exactly. I mean, don't get me wrong. There's still a lot to uncover. Like we've only been to space since the 50s and 60s. So
and I don't get the sense we've really figured ourselves out particularly well yet. So
no,
we got a long way to go on that. I think.
No, I mean it's fun challenges to overcome for sure.
Yeah. But so psychology in high school, though, that just seems like a bit of a leap from like why not go into the biology side of it if you were so excited about the spore stuff?
I mean, like I mentioned, I think it's more so I was interested in human interaction. So that leans definitely more on the psychology side than the biology side, even though I did like biology at the time. But I really wanted to know, okay, because the subjects I chose for high school were like history, philosophy, psychology. So for me, it was understanding people at the core of it. So that's why I chose psychology, and I ended up doing that at uni. And since then, whatever I was doing academically, I tried to apply in industry as well. So my bachelor's looked at group dynamics, and I got to work on researching the social side of people in the deserts who stayed there for like months at a time.
So what was the desert thing? How did you get? What was the project that was involved in?
Sure. So as part of like trying to enter the industry, I had a mentor. Again, that span out of me doing the dissertation. And I reached out to a lot of researchers in the area and said, "Hey, I don't know what I'm doing. Help me out."
Right.
And some of them were very lovely and pointed me in the direction of an organization called the Austrian Space Forum. And those guys are based in Innsbruck, Austria. And what they do is something called analog space missions. It's not analog or digital in that sense, but it's more they go to environments analogous to a space environment. So
cool.
Places on Earth that can represent
miserable places, basically.
Yeah.
Have a nice way of saying, come and join us in a miserable space on Earth.
Yeah. So they'll go to glaciers, they'll go to deserts, like all sorts of extreme environments, and they will spend a month there and they'll do research and test out technology. And part of the research I did was like the human factor side of things, like how do people behave in a month in these spaces? How do they interact with each other? And then also, how do they interact with mission control back home? Because usually they'd have a mission control in Austria, and they'd either communicate through delayed audio calls or video calls, or they they do text messages as well,
right?
Because they try and simulate what it would be like on the moon, where you've got like around 7 seconds lag.
Yeah.
Or Mars, that's tricky. That's like 4 to 20 minutes. So what we're doing right now, imagine trying to do a podcast on Mars. It just wouldn't happen.
Yeah, I feel like there's a few of our podcasts have gone that way. But yes, yeah, I definitely.
I mean, I fear for my internet connection sometimes. So
yeah, well, don't we all? That's I mean, we're entirely reliant on it at this point. I mean, it was one of the things I noticed during the pandemic was that having to switch to, because even though this is amazing and it's quite immediate, it feels quite immediate, there is still something a little different than actually speaking to someone, even on a telephone. I mean, there's a difference of the way you interact.
Yeah,
when you were doing the studying, were you actually in these environments with them, or were you able to observe? No, you were observing from afar.
Yeah, the tricky thing with these analogs is that it's very they've got very tight budgets, so you can only go there if you're like strictly necessary.
Right.
I mean, that's a bit of a downplay on myself. I was useful to the team, I think, but it was only like strictly the crew themselves and supporting crew around them. They were there. Everyone else was back in mission control.
But that sort of makes sense, though, doesn't it? Because I mean, if you're a part of the problem, if you're actually in there as well, aren't you? Like, aren't you going to affect?
It helps being a neutral observer. I mean, it's tricky on both sides, right? If you go, you could be part of the problem, but if you're not there, you're not seeing everything firsthand either. So you have to like balance that dynamic. So it's quite kind of tricky.
And did they have, I mean, what sort of coverage did you have, or were you relying on their reports as to what had happened? I mean, filming everything with these like hamsters in a cage,
so we'd have text communications, so you can see the chats. You could talk to the crew as well. Sometimes like there'd be one-on-one accounts, or you can talk to the broader crew. But again, like, something that was really cool about what the Austrian Space Forum do is they have really strict selection criteria. So their selections are pretty rigorous, not as rigorous as like NASA or ESA would do, but it still takes them like a year to select people. They are that adamant into making the process solid.
I mean, I'm convinced someone should do a "So You Want to Be an Astronaut" show, because the stuff that they have to go through is extraordinary.
I mean you've done, you're in Canada, right?
Yeah.
So one of your kinsmen, as it were, Chris Hadfield, he did a show with the BBC a few years ago. Astronauts, do you have what it takes? I would fully recommend watching that. It'd be right up your street.
This is the other thing that drives me mad, is the BBC's always done any show you come up with. Any show you come up with, the BBC's already done one years ago.
Well, I'd like to see more. It was a one and done, and I think it got a lot of interest. I loved it. I'm biased like that. I like doing that.
Oh my God, I would totally. I mean,
get also, Canada to do it.
There you go. Yeah, we'll get this. So okay. You know what? I'll work on that. Yeah,
I'll help you out. Let's do it. Let's make it happen.
I just think it'd be fascinating. Also, it's people going towards something that's such a more important goal than just, oh, you won $1 million, or this is establishing a career. This is establishing a love for exploration and science. My whole new thing now is all about how do we make this stuff exciting? Because I feel like there's a whole internet of stuff. If you want to learn anything, it's out there. You just have to inspire people to want to look for it. That's all. You don't have to teach them anything. You just need to get them inspired enough to actually go and do it. So.
And I think that TV show did a great job of, we talk about democratizing space all the time. It's a bit of a buzzword, bit of jargon, but like, how do we make space more exciting for everyday people? And I think personally, this is me speaking, I think the space industry's got a bit of a difficulty communicating that. There's a lot of reasons why. I mean, it's a tricky climate currently, so
was run by billionaires basically at this point.
Yeah, exactly. So that has a lot of connotations around it. And then people are questioning, why are we spending this money on space? Which there's a lot of good that comes out of the space industry. So like the satellites that we send up to observe the Earth.
No one's complaining about good coverage.
No, exactly. Yeah. But it's not always well known. It's not necessarily the most exciting thing. Like satellites, they are super important, and they cover the majority of the space industry's revenue for good reason. But people aren't always necessarily interested in that. There's less of a human story in satellites than there is in human spaceflight. But human spaceflight doesn't bring in as much money.
Right, of course. Right now, it's just it's almost the tourist approach to it, isn't it?
But that show that I mentioned, it did a great job of showing the public what entails in astronaut selection, what are the stages and that kind of thing. Which I'd love to see more of those shows pop up.
Oh, I'm definitely going to watch that then. Yeah, definitely going to go.
I'll send you a link. Yeah.
Oh, fantastic! Oh, great. So you are observing the desert stuff, but it sounds like you. I mean, there's quite limited access to the information. Then if you're not, I mean, I for some reason I sort of pictured video cameras everywhere so you could study interactions and stuff. How do you study interactions without watching? Because there's so much subtlety in just the way we look at each other, moves and reactions and stuff.
It really depends on the mission. So some missions you will have more data than others. That one, just the chance we didn't. And in that case, you are limited to like post-mission interviews. So you'll sit down with people and interview them one-on-one. What worked, what didn't work, who did you get on with, who did you not get on with, why?
Right.
But when it comes to the science side of things, observations are number one. We would ideally we want to observe people because then you can see people in their natural state. Again, people sometimes are still aware they're on camera. But in interviews, it's a bit trickier because people might have forgotten something because you've interviewed them 2 weeks or a month after the mission's ended and their brain is somewhere else. It's still good for getting some data. I think so. Yeah. So some missions you will get to observe people. Some because of like privacy challenges, you won't get that information. Some missions are designed to be research missions, in which case people who are part of that crew know they're going to be observed, which is a good thing and a bad thing. It's a good thing because you can get the data, the observation data from CCTV and stuff like that. It's a bad thing because people know they're being observed, so you won't always get the most natural behavior from them. So yeah, observations number one, interviews are number two. Both great, both are complementary to each other. There was a really cool study called Mars 500, which I think they did in Russia. Are you familiar with this?
No. Okay. I just love the name.
Yeah, and this was people in a Russian facility, which was not simulating. Well, again, when I say simulating, people think digital, but it's actually like replicating a Mars mission here on Earth.
Right. This is the analogous type thing.
Analogous type thing.
Analogous. That's it. Yeah.
And they had, I think it was a small crew, probably around, I think it was around 6. But yeah, it was 500 days in a confined environment. And yeah,
trust they had Russia to pull that one off.
But it's an interdisciplinary crew, international crew.
Oh, it was. Oh, okay.
So they had people from Europe. They had a Chinese analog astronaut. Of course, they had some Russians as well. So it was very international. And yeah, they were in there for 500 days. It's been a while since I looked at the paper.
But that's the space station, right? I mean, that's basically what's happening with the space station. Right?
Yeah, so on the space station, the duration of the mission is around 6 months. I mean, some people go up to a year, which is incredible.
Some people go up and stay a lot longer than they expected.
What are you hinting at, David?
That must be an absolute. You must be fascinated by that because that's like that. Talk about like suddenly getting all this information about stuff that you would never normally be able to get. You got 2 extra people on a space station because they can't get off. I mean, that's got to be fascinating.
It's an interesting one because I think with professional astronauts, so NASA, European Space Agency astronauts, they are trained so well. I mean, the selection process for an astronaut is around 1.5 years, sometimes 2 years. It's a long period, and they really whittle down the best of the best. And then they're also trained for 2 years. They're trained like all sorts of types of hardware and like science they're doing on the space station. They're trained for the different vehicles. If they're flying with SpaceX or a Russian vehicle or something else, there's so many vehicles that they need to know how to operate. And then finally, they're trained on a bunch of different scenarios that they might face. You know, like what if your oxygen's going down? What if there's a fire? Things like that. So they are so prepared for the unexpected that in their mindset, I'm sure it could have swung both ways. They could have been happy that they spent longer in space. Most of the astronauts I've chatted to love spending time in space.
Yeah, it would be like, sweet.
This is my job. I want to spend more time
I'm
doing my
trapped in
job.
paradise for a little while. Yeah.
But alternatively, the space industry is good at not hiding, but I'd say you don't always see behind the scenes, that is.
Right.
And all I'll say on that front is sometimes the unexpected does occur. So they might, I haven't chatted to these 2 astronauts in particular, but they might not necessarily not have been too happy at staying up. I never want to say and like cast a blanket statement. Yeah, they're astronauts. They love being up there. Maybe they had some events back on Earth, like parents or child birthdays that they were looking forward to seeing and didn't end up happening. So it could swing both ways.
And on the day too. I mean, you got some days where you're going to be frustrated that you're there and
spot on. Yeah, that's a very human way of looking at it. Yeah. So it's that kind of thing. So I think the challenge there is, as professional astronauts, I think they would have been ready to face it. Likely would have enjoyed it, but it's not certain. I think the challenge instead is with the family and friends back on Earth, who are also trained to a degree, but nowhere near as stringently. So NASA will sometimes involve families and friends of astronauts, not in the training process, but they get to observe, they get to have like a know-how of what's going on, what they're doing, which kind of helps. Like if your partner is going away to train for a year and a half, and astronauts, they'll train in Europe, they'll train in the US, some of them will train in Russia. Right. They are flying a lot. I mean, I've got a friend of mine who he became a suborbital astronaut, so he flew with Virgin Galactic. Even now he travels all the time. Like it's an insane amount. So with a family, that can get quite tricky. So including them in the process, which is what NASA do, really helps with the awareness and understanding element. But even with that, I can imagine it's tough. You know, you saying bye to your loved one for 2 weeks. I think it was around 2 weeks. The original mission for those two astronauts was 2 weeks, and you have that in your mind, and then suddenly it's several months up in space, and that can be tricky. I can imagine that can be very, very tricky.
And this wasn't planned for us, so you've got to be thinking like, are they telling us everything? Are they okay? Are there, I mean,
yeah, I think in NASA's credit, they probably would have been very transparent about it all. I think what they did, they just shifted the rotors around, so they pushed back the mission afterwards, and they always had a capsule ready to take them down if necessary. So I think that's something that wasn't necessarily covered in the media.
So there was an emergency one if they
so they could have come down at any time
if they had to, but
but they readjusted the rotors and said, listen, like it's not ideal, but we can.
When you say readjusted the rotors, you mean just the rotation for what was
exactly the crew rotation. So they extended the stay of those.
You got all this, you got all this, deep space lingo stuff. We gotta.
Jargon. Yeah, no, we are really bad at that. The amount of TLAs or 3-letter acronyms in our
we all are. Look, that was my sort of realization going into when I first got interested in the IT side of stuff and electronics and stuff. Was I was just like, oh come on, guys, just call them what they are. Why do you have to come up with all these fancy? But I also understand you want to be very, especially in science. I mean, they got the classic mistake with the who's using inches and who's using centimeters. Little things like that. You need to be very specific. So you need specific words. I mean, I get it, but it is sometimes.
What's your stance on the inches, centimeters debate?
It's got to be centimeters. I don't understand what the hell.
We can carry on talking.
Well, I was born in England, raised in Canada, and then went to the States. And I'm just like, what? A foot? I think we're a little beyond a foot at this point. Can we?
Yeah.
No. I love the metric. I will often default back. I'm so old that they were doing the changeover while I was in school. Oh, wow. So an already failing student became even worse when I suddenly had a whole other way of looking at this stuff.
Having to do those conversions all of a sudden out of nowhere, that sounds very tricky.
But the metric is not tough. I mean, it's like that. The whole point of it is to make it simpler than, we also don't have 1,000 coins like we used to have, the threepenny piece and the, all the, so there was all that as well. So, I'm firmly, squarely in the, on the metric.
Likewise, I'll join you on that stance.
But who's not using that now? Is it NASA's not using that? Is that?
Oh, I don't actually know. I think right now, because there's so much international cooperation going on in space still, thankfully, I think they convert all the time. So I think there's some probably not from the engineering side, but I can imagine they convert,
I mean, England and North America can't even agree on the damn billion. I mean, like, it's like there's so many different, these little things you go like, what? We really haven't figured these things out yet? I mean, it's just, so that I guess the defining stuff is very important.
Yeah.
So go back. So you start in the desert because that's a good extreme environment to be observing. Yeah. Where were you when this was happening?
I was in mission control, so I was in Austria.
Oh, nice. Okay.
Yeah. I even had
what about the psychology of that? Like, what about the psychology of mission control too? Because that's got to be fascinating.
Super fascinating. I mean, it really depends on the mission. It's such a psychologist take to say, oh, it really depends. But honestly, it does. So we were a very close knit team. Like at least in my experience, in my opinion, we didn't really have that many issues. It was mainly making sure everyone else was okay. I think that's generally the opinion. If you've got a functional mission control, it's like, how do we create the best environment for everyone, including the people on the field? So we were very transparent. We had very good communication and very honest. If there was an issue, we'd bring it up firsthand and address it without any emotion, let's say.
Right. So you have to be blunt, but you have,
it's a tricky balance. You want to.
So what's an example of that? Like if you've got to tell, what's an example of something that could go wrong that you have to explain to someone?
I think in the sense that if there's an emergency, if there's like a certain scenario that goes wrong on field, so there was one instance where an ATV turned over in field, is then the decision-making process on the field, because they're there, they will be doing that on the fly. And they've got procedures, like there's so many procedures written up beforehand as to what can go wrong. But even so, when that does happen, you don't just sit around at mission control doing nothing. You are actively.
Boy, they screwed that up.
Yeah. I was like, I'm just going to sip my coffee and let them handle it.
Yeah. Wow. This is pass me the popcorn. Yeah. You've got to be more active than that.
Yeah. So you'll be tracking what's happening, actively listening, talking about decision-making processes with the rest of the team, seeing what's on the procedures, and just like facilitating as much as you can back and forth between the two teams. So that's like an example. Yeah. But I loved it. I had a short stint at Capcom as well. So that's like the person in mission control talking with the team.
Oh, wow.
I really enjoyed that. Like typically in a
I feel
real,
like you've got the voice for it too. You have a mission control voice.
Thank you very much. That's very kind of you.
I would cast you as mission control if I was. Yeah.
Again, let's make it happen. The thing I'd fail at is the engineering side. So
me too. It's fine. Yeah, that's what you get writers for. That's it. Yeah.
Well, the tricky thing in real missions, it's usually actual astronauts who act as Capcoms, like the guys communicating between mission control and the field. And that's been a tradition since the 50s and 60s. So it makes sense because astronauts, they train for all sorts of different scenarios. And if something goes wrong in space, having someone who also knows like the training and the procedures, being the voice between mission control, and also for the astronauts actually experiencing it, they know it's not some random person who's chatting to them.
Right. It's not some nerd who studied this in school.
It's a fellow crewman or crewwoman. So yeah. So I wouldn't pass on that front. I enjoy it.
Well, okay. So I guess something that I noticed, and maybe this is just my own silliness, but it feels like we started with with this sort of like stunt pilot, rogue cowboy kind of astronaut, in all the right stuff. And we've moved now more into almost, I don't want to say social media, but I want to say, certainly press presentable, more generalists, if that makes sense. And in between there were scientists, and I'm assuming that the scientists were an issue because if you're just focused on your science, you're not necessarily very good with other people. Have you seen a shift in the way people are selected for these things, or the type of people who get selected for this stuff?
So I think you had the transition between the profiles of astronauts is spot on, in the sense that you go back to the 50s and 60s and you had jet pilots. That was, and you still do these days.
Hard drinking, womanizing, macho, whatever. Yeah.
I mean, the film The Right Stuff is a great example of that, and the book as well.
The book fantastic. I love both of them. The book is extraordinary though, because I just couldn't get over the detail it went into on that stuff.
Yeah. So in the 60s, that was the priority. But when we select people for missions, you have the personality and the job profile, as it were, but that's always corresponding to the mission profile. So what are the constraints of the mission? How long are they up there for? How many people are going to be up there? So how do you set those parameters? In the early 60s, it was 1 or 2 people max. I mean, obviously you had the Apollo missions with 3 people.
Yeah, but you're right. That's not as difficult to find personalities, and also who cares? It's just 3 of them, right? Yeah.
So in the 60s, when you first started off, like the Mercury missions, it was like 1 person alone. So, and they were only doing suborbital and at the end, orbital trips. But they weren't up there for longer than a day or 2. So
they're basically just hanging on. There wasn't an awful lot that they could do at that point either, was there?
No, they had they had to fight to include a window in the capsule. It was that stringent.
I love that story. They're like, you don't need a window. We want a window. We're
going up. We want to see the Earth. Come on.
Exactly. Yeah.
And that's still something that we have to kind of fight on. But so at that point, that mission profile, like short duration, 1 person, the main priority is that they can operate the equipment. That is number 1. So like high technical understanding, high performance, very resilient on that side. But as missions evolved, so they got longer in duration, you've got crews which are larger in size. So like the International Space Station is a good example. So you're going from like the early 60s, one or two people up there flying for short amount of times. And now you've got the ISS, the International Space Station, where you've got crews of, on average, 6 or 8 people who are staying up there for 6 months. It's a totally different ball game. So the selection criteria for that are very different. I mean, you still obviously want people who are very technically competent. So like, you're spending so much money to send these people up there and so much money on the maintenance of the space station. They need to, of course, pass a certain technical bar, and they all do. But you also now include an element of, okay, can they like living skills? It's one thing. Teamwork skills is often used, and it's correct. And that's how do people work together. But I think something that isn't covered as often is, yes, you're working together, but you're also living together. The ISS is not just the office in space; it is a home in space. So can people live together for months at a time? And the way I always phrase it is based off something Chris Hadfield actually said. It's like along the lines of, could you imagine seeing yourself fly to space with this person? And not necessarily, I put that thought scenario about if you were to fly to space with family or friends, as a mind experiment, don't voice it to other people, but who of those family and friends would you want to go with? And
well, I wouldn't want to go with me, that's for sure. I mean, I'm the last person who would, it's, I mean,
how come, if you don't mind me asking?
Well, just because I am emotional, I will literally change my mind by the end of a sentence. I'll have convinced myself. So I feel like I'm not that. I feel like you need to have a certain very good, focus for this kind of stuff. And I'm just not that. I don't, I feel like I would get distracted.
I can walk you through one of the personality profiles that we use to select.
Oh, really?
And then you can self-assess if you want.
Oh, wow. Oh, that would be cool.
Yeah, we'll get to that. Yeah, we'll get to that.
That's great.
But to ask your question,
I'm embarrassed already.
Oh, don't be silly. I think a lot of us would struggle. I think I'd struggle as well. But I think to answer your question, sorry, there has been a shift. Definitely, there's been a shift in the terms of mission profiles and personality profiles. I think for the more influencer type flights, that's more to do with the suborbital commercial trips that are going on right now, with like Blue Origin, Virgin Galactic.
Yeah, like Katy Perry didn't pass any big astronaut.
I think so. Blue Origin, if I'm recalling correctly, I could be wrong on this, but I think they do like a day or two training. But it's nowhere near, what NASA and ESA do with 2 years of training. But it's a different mission profile. They're going up for, technically in space for a few minutes, but the whole thing's probably a bit longer than that. But again, they're not staying up there for months at a time, so they don't necessarily need to be trained to the same extent.
You just have to know they're not going to kill each other in the few minutes.
Yeah. And so, but in terms of like actual, NASA and ESA missions, that's still very stringent and very highly selective. Yeah.
It's fascinating because I love the way you're pointing out how, because of the changing in missions, you sort of forget that it's not just, you're not an astronaut for everything. You're an astronaut for those specific things that you're trained for.
Yeah. And you mentioned training as well. So there's a very, when I say uniformed, each agency varies on how they select people. There's a general kind of structure, but everyone's there's different ways of measuring people and selecting people. These vary from organization, and organizations change how they select people over time anyway.
Right.
But also the training is very different per individual, because some individuals will have to do certain science.
Well, you probably don't want all the same people too, right? I'm guessing that you want a mix of different people and different perspectives. Otherwise, if you've all got the same hive brain trying to solve the same problem, you're not going to solve it as best as if you've got multiple different perspectives.
Yeah, exactly. And so for the most part, they will select a lot of jet fighter pilots because they're a very good analog to the pressures of space, excuse me. But they also select, microbiologists and other types of science backgrounds as well. So there's room for many different kinds of people in space, for sure.
Yeah. Well, we've got all the racks of different stuff that experiments they're working on. We were talking to about 3D printing in space. And there's a whole what the astronauts were required to do with that. So Bosco was talking about that. It's fantastic.
And that's why astronauts get trained for up to 2 years, because there's so many different science experiments going up there that they have to be familiar with on the ground before they get paid a lot of money. Well, they don't get paid a lot of money, but it costs a lot of money to send them up there. And they don't want to get anything wrong with the tech when they're up there. So that's why it takes so long.
Are there red flags? Are there things like when you, in your first meeting with someone, you can go, yeah, this is not going to...
I don't think I'm necessarily that good, but I think also as someone who has selected for extreme environments, it's an ongoing process. So you go through stages, and so the way it usually works is like you have the application phase. So you'll see through CVs, motivational letters, sometimes even videos, which is fascinating.
Oh yeah,
and then you whittle.
I mean,
and just to put it in context, for like NASA and ESA selections, these can be in the thousands. So I think the last ESA selection, 2021, 2022, they had around 22,000 people.
That was it. That's what was it, Antonio? I can't remember the guy's name, I'm afraid. Was or Pablo, I think it was saying that it was like and they narrowed it down to like 5.
Yeah. And it's an insane process. So you start off with 22,000. I mean, granted, that's one of the highest ones we've seen. It's typically like anywhere from 5K to like 15K-ish. It's usually in that ballpark. 22 is insane. But that's at the application phase. And you have a job profile in mind. So like they have to be certain height, certain weight to fit in the vehicles. They have to have an educational background of, master's degree or bachelor's degree in a STEM subject, and work experience of 3 years, or jet fighter experience of like 1,000 hours, I think it was.
Wow.
And then they whittle people from their CVs and letters to fit that profile. And you still end up with hundreds. And at that point, you bring them into like an assessment center. And they'll do like arithmetic tests, verbal reasoning, non-verbal reasoning. I don't know if you guys have ever done that as a kid.
What's that? That's
so like pattern matching. Like if you were, if you like unfolded a cube, and you have like different options of, okay, if you were to fold this cube back up, which is the right option for how it would look, stuff like that.
That's my spatial geometry is so good. But I get lost in a box.
The reason they do that is because in microgravity, there's
no up and down.
So they need to make sure people, that's like one way of testing for them.
Right. Wow. I didn't even think of that. Yeah, of course.
So they do things like that, memory tests, cognition tests, all that jazz, personality questionnaires. So that's in the basic like stage, as it were. Then you go to advanced tests, and like this is when you then whittle the hundreds down to like maybe around 100 or so. And then you will start doing medical tests. So like your cardiovascular situation, skeletal situation, your bloods, things like that. You'll be put through emergency scenarios. So one of them is like firefighting scenarios. You're in a confined space, a fire breaks out. Here are the procedures beforehand, study them quickly, then execute it with your teammates. Another one is underwater survival. So I'm not sure if you've ever seen the helicopter training scenarios where they put in like a helicopter skeleton, as it were, then dunked into a pool, and then the helicopter just flips. Again, you're trained on how to do this beforehand.
Right.
But then
no one makes it. It's weird. Yeah,
exactly. And
whittles them down to the few.
Hopefully not. Not in that sense. But and the idea is you unbuckle your harness, break through the window, and swim back up. Right. But it's. I mean, it sounds nerve-wracking on paper, but imagine it in person. And they usually imagine the reason they do this is if you're flying with a capsule and you veer off course, so you have to do like an emergency landing at nighttime at sea. Not too dissimilar. And you're submerged, you're going all over the place, you get out and it's pitch black. So sometimes they'll replicate that situation with the helicopter training in like a dark room, and with like flashing lights and like thunder and lightning kind of simulation. So not everyone can handle that. Understandably, it's a very stressful
I'm getting
situation.
nervous just talking about it. Exactly. I feel my heart rate, So that's one of the things they'll do at the advanced kind of stage. And that definitely whittles people down. And over time, you do enough of these kind of tests and you go to like a final interview, which might be with other astronauts. It might be like from a carefully selected board of experienced professionals in the space agency and the heads of agencies as well. Right. And that could be one-on-one. It could be a board interview. And after that, you have essentially whittled from thousands of applicants down to like a final 10-ish around. So incredibly interesting process. But is there at any point, is there a strictly psychological, like, I mean, do they put them all in a room? I kind of wish I could remember the name of this astronaut that we were talking to, because I think that would probably help. But he was saying that there was some kind of a basically they tried to get you as angry as possible and put you all together and stuff. There's like
I mean, it varies depending on who's selecting, but that wouldn't surprise me at all if you're trying to get a raise out of people, because it's really important for astronauts to be able to communicate concisely and clearly without heated emotion in times of stress. So if something goes wrong on a space station, you don't want to be handling that with anger to your colleagues. You want to be
which is my default by the way. So his name is Pablo Alvarez Fernandez. Wonderful guy. Like he's now my favorite astronaut, and he hasn't even been in space yet. So
I hope he gets a chance soon.
Yeah. I will hopefully, yeah.
But that is definitely a thing. Like that's something that some of my colleagues have used to assess people, and yeah, it's something that we observe and we sometimes try and do in interviews as well. Just try and push people's buttons. But some people are wise to this. They'll know what you're doing instantly. Yeah.
Well,
but
most people who reach
part of the
that
game.
Stage, I guess most people who reach that stage are probably smart enough to know that they've got,
But if someone doesn't respond to that, that's also a red flag.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, you don't want a psychopath up there either, right? Like with no empathy and no.
Yeah, and that's why there are psychological interviews, but there's also psychiatric interviews for people. So I'm not a psychiatrist, but there are people who are very apt at kind of discerning if someone's got a certain issue. Let's put it that way.
Interesting. There's definitely a space murder story in this somewhere. Are there any films you've seen that you feel sort of captured this or capture your imagination about this idea of because every sci-fi is basically a bunch of different people all shoved together in an environment, and then usually one of them loses it or something. But so I'm just curious to know if any of them are
about losing the tropes. I think maybe not a film, but a show. And it's only covered in like a very short segment, but I thought it was really beautiful. Is the Expanse? I think it's in the pilot of the Expanse. There's a EXO, so there's an officer who loses it, and there's a scene where he's in his private quarters, and Jim Holden, the main character, goes to the private quarters, and it's just this guy who's just mumbling, crying, and on the floor there's just dirt and soil, and they're out in deep space. They're in near Mars or something like that, and this guy has completely lost it, and he's just walking on the soil, like the sensation of being back on Earth. I think that was pretty beautifully done. Yeah, sure, some creative license, of course, but that's you have to do that when you're working in the creative industry. But I thought that was really nicely done.
That's interesting, because that's the kind of thing you could see people craving after long periods in space. I just want to feel the Earth. Look, I remember moving to LA, and I had to put long before there were these sound generating things, I was putting on loops of rain because I missed rain. Like it rains not a ton here, but it does, and you get these wonderful thunderstorms and stuff. And in LA, it was just never.
I was about to say, speak for yourself. I'm in the UK. It rains nonstop.
Well, that's true.
I could use a break.
That's why I like England so much. I think so. The plan is to retire there to sunny England.
But don't get me wrong. When it's sunny, it's glorious here. And
it really is.
We've had some luck recently, but we get plenty of rain.
Yeah, for some reason, England has managed to retain such large portions of green areas that even in Toronto, you see the size of England compared to Ontario, let alone Canada, and I'm still amazed at how much concrete I'm surrounded by, given the vast amount of expanses we have. That's an interesting point, though. If you're so-called, if we say we're losing it and we want to feel the sand beneath our feet type thing, plants. I mean, do we need to? This must change. This must relate to your the circadian light that you've been experimenting with as well. So maybe we could talk about that. That you've got this fantastic project that deals with our circadian rhythms in space and how we can mess with those.
So I think this is coming on to the design of stations in extreme environments.
Is that okay? Is there anything you wanted to cover before we go into that, or
no? I can cover it collectively. That's fine.
I jump all over the place, so
that's fine. We'll come back to the personality thing. We could go through that together.
Okay, great.
But I think so moving on to the design of these environments, I think it's a tricky trade-off because you don't want to get anything wrong in space. We've had numerous accidents from the 80s, early 2000s with the space shuttles.
I remember watching that.
And it's tragic. It's absolutely tragic and very sad, obviously.
And sets the thing back by decades. Yeah.
And so there's a very, I believe, rightfully conservative approach to designing for space where function takes priority. So you have to make sure everything is engineeringly sound. You have to use materials which won't do something called off-gassing, which is releasing chemicals that might be toxic in the air, not ideal for living, or that are flammable. So, but this also creates an issue if you're trying to design spaces which are, a bit all natural. So, if you can't use wood, what are you going to use? You're going to end up with what we sadly have on the International Space Station, which is a very white, kind of like sterile environment that is cluttered with cables. I would encourage anyone looking to just Google image search International Space Station interior. And it's just, a cluster.
And it's a cable management nightmare. Let's see if I can pull it up. You keep talking. I'll look it up.
Sure, yeah, go for it. So sadly, that it's a tricky one because it's a very much a balance between engineering and other disciplines to be like, okay, we got to keep people alive in space, so the engineering is paramount. But at the same time, we're now talking about an era where less trained people are flying to space. We're going to the moon again, like NASA's Artemis programs.
Yeah, big time. It's like a big push for it again, isn't it?
Yeah, and eventually we'll be going to Mars. Like that even like you've got the SpaceX approach to Mars, but even that it's on NASA's timeline as well. So our mission parameters that I mentioned earlier, they will get longer. So currently on the ISS, the space station, it's 6 months. The moon will be further in distance, but still in terms of duration, it probably will still be around 6 months as well to a year. There you go. That's the interior of the ISS.
I mean, I've got to say, I'm not showing you a picture of my desk because it looks similar. My cable management has always been very questionable, but that's insane. So and that's not exactly comforting.
No, but I was going to say, if it's similar to your desk, would you sleep at your desk?
No. Good point.
No. Yeah, and this is what I'd like to see shifted. And I wasn't
sure if that was a trick question. So
no, it's not a trick question at all. Don't worry. This is what I kind of want to see shifted, especially as we get people who aren't trained professionally, like NASA or ESA astronauts, to fly up there. And as eventually we start doing mission profiles, which are further away, further away from Earth, and also longer in duration. Like a Mars mission, hypothetically, is around 2 to 3 years. It's a long period of time to be away from Earth.
We'll have to discuss why we're going to Mars as well.
Sure.
That's a whole other thing I want to
And so in that sense, so space stations have been very much designed for function and for work. But like I mentioned earlier, people are not just working in these environments, they're living in these environments. And I would the question I always have at the back of my mind is, okay, we're designing these places for working in, but why aren't we designing them to be lived in, to be slept in? Like personally, like if I were to walk back from my train station back home and enter this place, would I be comfortable sleeping here? The answer is probably no.
Right.
So what can we do to kind of like balance that, the work and function approach, which is so necessary? Like just keeping function paramount and keeping people safe and alive. That's you can't compromise on that.
Obviously, yeah.
But also with, if people are going to be living in there for longer periods of time, how do we create comfortable living environments? Because the current status quo, frankly, I don't think is good enough. But it's a very interesting challenge. I'm not saying I've got the answers, but there are some interesting approaches. I mean, the ISS, the space station, was built in the 90s and 2000s. I mean, there's been some development in materials science, amongst other types of science, of the types of things that we
computers
can use
and cabling and everything. Yeah.
So I feel like we should be able to design new approaches to living in space. And some of the cool things, so there's a company called VAST in Long Beach in LA.
VAST, good name.
In California. And they are working on there's a bunch of companies working on the world's first commercial space station, but they're one of them. And the reason I like them is because...
Is this Vast Space?
Yeah, Vast Space. Yeah. And I think if you're on the website, you should see Haven 1 is the name of their space station.
We'll share it, and then we can all see what's going on here. Sure. I'm so happy I can do this once in a while now.
It's cool stuff.
It really is neat looking stuff, isn't it?
Yeah.
Everyone loves the waffle. Everyone takes the waffle approach.
Yeah. And again, I've got no association with these guys, but I like what they're doing. So like,
use Haven 1 you wanted to look at? Is that the
Haven 1? I'm not sure. If you keep scrolling, you should be able to see the interior.
Beautiful videos, yeah.
Yeah. They put a lot of effort. There you go. So you see that wood paneling? So they're one of the first I've seen, at least, to do wood paneling in space, and it instantly makes the environment that much cozier. And it's a wood veneer, so they're trying to tackle the issue that I mentioned with flammability and off-gassing. But when I chatted to one of their designers at a conference recently, I think they said it took around 6 months to design and like create those that tech demonstration, as it were. So it's clearly possible on some fronts. Now we'll see, because one of their potential partners might be NASA, and NASA requirements are so stringent for good reason. We'll see if it makes it up there. It might not necessarily make it up there, but I'd like to see it,
And what
Because
about
if
cost? I agree, because think about it. We're iterating through the machines and making the machines better and more efficient. Well, we're part of that process. If you can make us, put us in a better state of mood, like allow us to stay up there longer, allow us not to waste time on things that we, it just makes sense to me.
I'm not sure about cost. I don't have an insight into how much that development must have cost, but 6 months is good going from a space point of view. That's very quick. But I think things like that. So change in materials, a variety of materials as well, just so it's not the same white plastic up there. Different textures, different colors. I think that's so important. And I think at a certain point, when you have people who aren't professionally trained astronauts, who haven't had 2 years of training and a 2-year selection process, if it's just you and me going up there for research or whatever,
you're doomed. But
but how can we make it not doomed?
Right.
And at what point is form suddenly complementary of function, because you have like a very pleasant space to live and work in, to the point where it helps people perform. So it's not just suddenly the base is function and form is just a nice to have. Well, what if you introduce form as something that actually helps people well-being and cognitive performance?
Well, it's something we have to address at some point, because there's no way we're going to Mars in a tin can. It's just
and
like this.
The way I look at this is kind of the progression in the aviation industry in a way, because you have this like the beginners, the beginning phase of it all is like the pioneers, right? So if it was the Kitty Hawk, the first,
was that it? Yeah, was
that the first plane?
Right. Was that the Wright brothers one?
The Wright brothers, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just wood.
That was not
and bolts and straw.
And there was nothing comfortable about that.
No, exactly. All. So you have a certain period of like technology where of course it's not going to be comfortable. This is for the pioneers who are just trying to make sure the tech works.
Hang on. That's it.
And over decades, you start seeing an industry take off. So I think, I don't know the exact decade when commercial aviation kicked off, but probably like 40s and 50s. The introduction of like the jumbo jet, probably 60s and 70s. But over time, you see what was like a niche technology that hopped for like a few hundred meters, change into something that's taking people from London, for instance, all the way to Sydney, and people were paying a few thousand or a few hundred to do that, as opposed to the beginning where it was only for the rich.
It would have been absolutely prohibitive.
And that's the kind of analogy I think us in the space industry are chatting about right now. And we'll see if it ends up that way. Space is incredibly hard. It's such a jargon statement. We say it all the time, but it really is for a lot of engineering reasons. But right now we're on that kind of like transition point where, space tourism's kicking off. It doesn't have the best PR, as we're seeing. Like people didn't really, well, I can't speak for everyone, but like from everyone I've chatted to in my personal life, anecdotally, they haven't been too impressed with the space tourism side of things. But I think with my...
it just sort of reeks of privilege, I'm afraid.
Exactly, yeah. So
it doesn't feel like hard work. It feels like hard currency.
Yeah. And so I wasn't around in the 30s or 40s or 50s to see what it was like with the aviation industry.
Before anyone asks, neither was I.
But they might have felt the same way back then. The question is, I don't have the answer to this, but the question I'm posing is, will we eventually reach a point where the costs to go to space fall enough that it does become more accessible and it's not suddenly, like the playground of millionaires is the quote that I see up there.
Well, it must. It has to, right? There's no... Otherwise, it's just going to stagnate. There's no...
Exactly. So then it becomes interesting, because if the cost does fall enough, and we're suddenly seeing more people like you and I and people watching suddenly are able to go up there, what will we do up there? What will the spaces that we live or work like? Will we work in space, or will we just visit it temporarily? What are the opportunities out there? So I think that's an interesting one. Will space flight follow the same trajectory as aviation? And that's the analogy used in our industry quite often.
Interesting. I could see. I could see, as you say, to start, it's these very sort of niche, expensive projects. But if they're doing things like printing knee meniscuses up there and stuff, maybe it's a space tourism. The space tourism becomes like space medicine, or you go and get treated for something, or But as you say, in order for that to happen, they have to be environments that aren't just so utilitarian. They're literally prison cells right now. They're entirely utilitarian. And that's not how we operate. Professional
astronauts can take that. But people like you and me, it's a lot harder. But even so, like, even if I say professional astronauts can handle it, why do they have to? Why can't we make it a little bit better for them? Especially if they will end up going to, you know, the moon and Mars.
Well, that's like, smack to the right stuff thing again, where it's like, you just got to suck it up. You know what I mean? It's like, well, you know, we're not all superhuman. It's fascinating. You must get a lot of pushback, though, I would imagine, on this. There's got to be people going like, yeah. We just got to build better spaceships, whatever. You know what I mean? We don't want forget the wood paneling. Let's, you know,
it's tricky. It's because it's understandably a very engineering-led industry.
Yeah.
And to be fair, without the engineers, we'd be stuck on the ground.
Of course.
So there is a reason why they lead the industry. We need the engineers to do everything pretty much. And that includes the wood paneling. Like, yeah, we as on the social sciences, we can recommend these things, but the people who are actually testing them and making sure they're safe will be engineers. So it's a collaboration, but it's just the ratio. Like, there's way more engineers out there, and they've got a lot of deadlines and requirements they need to meet. And not everyone can afford to, you know, test this kind of stuff. NASA can, and they get vast because they've got such a focus on the design of their space station. Not all commercial space stations do, but they do. They've clearly put money behind it. So it's an issue of money and requirements, sadly. And often, more than not, you won't have these kind of considerations as to, okay, how do we design these spaces better for people?
Well, and it's a good reason to fund projects that aren't necessarily money based. You know, these are research projects. That's the idea, is to learn how we're gonna how we can survive better in these environments.
And it comes back to, like, right now we're in that pioneer / beginning of tourism phase. So is there a point in investing in, like, design at the moment, because we don't have that many average people going up there yet? But at some point there will be. So at some point we need to start investing research in this kind of stuff.
And as the price goes down, the price per, you know, whatever pound of stuff or kilogram
cost per kilogram,
as soon as that gets low enough, then you can start hauling stuff that you know. So maybe it's just finding that. So we'll get. I think we'll get to some questions at some point.
Sure.
I know that Agne usually gathers up some good ones for us, but where are you now with this stuff? Like, what is the, you know, we got to the desert, then I completely took you sidetracked. You also did there was a fascinating looking Arctic.
So that was back in that was back in 2020. So I worked with a company called Space
before the pandemic.
Yeah, actually, this was during the mission was at the end of 2020.
Well, that's the time you want to be by yourself out in the Arctic.
Like good. Everyone's like, so what? We're living it at home. You're in the Arctic.
Yeah.
So I went with a company called Saga Space Architects. They're based in Copenhagen, in Denmark.
That sort of explains the design somehow.
They
have a very
Scandinavian design for sure. I mean, I went with those. I studied with the two co-founders back in 2018.
I think I've actually got them up here already. Yeah, there you go. Let me share that.
And they reached out to me 2019, like the start of 2020, and they said, "Hey, we're gonna design." If you go to projects,
let me just pop back there. We go to projects,
and then you want Lunark.
The Lunark, that was it.
Yeah.
There we go. Space, Earth. That's not it. That's very cool, though. I'm going to recognize it when I see it. There it is.
There you go. Yeah.
Look at that. Come on. Like, that's awesome.
So they reached out and they said, hey, like, we, being the two co-founders, are going to we're going to design a habitat, so analogous to the moon. And we're going to go to Arctic Greenland for 2 months. We need someone to help out with the research. Do you want to join? So I said, okay, yeah, sure. Sounds great.
Yeah. When you say join, you mean actually go out there as well?
No. I didn't go out there. Right. I would love to, but that habitat, just for reference, is 17 meters cubed. So that's absolutely tiny.
It really is.
And so they had 2 levels to the habitat on the inside. So on the ground level, they had 2 workstations with desks that could be flipped up. They had an airlock and a toilet. And they also had an upstairs, which was 2 private cabins. And that was essentially it. They had a bit of storage underneath as well, but that was essentially it. And they were there for 2 months.
You want the right partner on that one for sure.
And so so it was a 2-month mission. I think the conditions in Arctic Greenland, it was like really close to the Arctic Circle. So it was like minus 30 degrees, like high wind speeds.
Like Toronto in the winter. Yeah, got it.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. And granted, no asteroids because they're not in space or anything like that, but they did have polar bears around, so they had
Oh
to be
God, yeah, I wouldn't
trained.
mess
They
with
had to be
them.
trained to shoot polar bears, which is definitely a tricky thing to consider.
Yeah.
But they had to be safe. So that was really interesting. So it was about what kind of design features can we put into this habitat to make people behave better, to perform better. One of the things they played around with was something called an algae photobioreactor, so like essentially just like a farm for algae.
Oh, cool.
So part of it was to do with food, so to eat the algae, just like as a proof of concept, and part of it was the noise it produced. It did produce like a deep,
satisfying, bubbling. Yeah.
The funny thing is, like, so from my research with them, they actually ended up having to turn that off. It was too overstimulating in confined spaces. I think one of the words that one of the crew said was, it was like living next to a river, which can be fine if you're visiting the river, but you don't necessarily always want to hear that bubbling sound. It wasn't actually pleasant over time, which is interesting because some people find white noise comforting and they'll listen to that. Like you listen to rain, for instance.
Yeah. Just
So
basically white noise. Yeah.
But for them, clearly it wasn't working, so they shut it off. One thing that did work, however, it was the same crew member actually, and they said they recorded, I think it was like an hour or two of walks in nature with their friends and family before they set off for the mission.
Oh wow!
I think their partner had like really high quality audio recordings, and then it was
nerds. You gotta love them.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And then when they're on the mission, they listen to them, and not only was it this blend of sounds from nature, but it was also the personalized element of having friends and family chat to you. And when they came back and I interviewed them, they said it went by so quickly. I could have listened to way more hours of that stuff.
Wow.
So
we're going to need space ASMR then, basically.
Honestly, yeah, it's a bit of a joke, but it's true. It was so useful for them.
That makes sense, though. There's definitely, because I mean, obviously, hearing is the audio side of stuff is such a huge part of our enjoyment of the planet.
Yeah, and it's something that I actually haven't seen that much of in the literature and the research. So I'd like to see more.
Yeah,
more of that,
and it's not
easy,
that hard to.
It's
I was easy
to do. Yeah,
that's what I was thinking. Yeah. I mean, it's a pair of AirPods or whatever. You know what I mean?
Like honestly, yeah. And that comes on to another finding which came out of it was the use of headphones, and they had VR headsets as well. Again, for like nature walks. That was part of the other research. Which
I can't do the VR, so I just feel sick.
That's fair, but yeah, I think that was in conjunction with a Danish university who did that. Again, like walking through nature through VR. But anyway. From my side, it was interesting how they used, because they were so close by all the time. I mean, they had their backs to one another pretty much when they were working on that first floor.
Oh my God! See, that's recipe for
2 months. For 2 months.
Yeah.
But they ended up using headphones and the VR as like privacy signals. So when when they have these on, don't talk to me.
Yeah, that's right.
So they established that quite early on. But the caveat, and being very transparent about all this, is that they were best friends before the mission. Still are.
Right. That's good. Good point.
They're still good friends.
They used to be wonderful friends.
But that also meant that they could have very frank discussions about, okay, we're going to spend 2 months in a very small space together. What are some of like the ground rules that we're going to implement? One of them was we're never going to interrupt. We're never going to go into each other's private spaces. Whatever like small sanctity of privacy you had, you couldn't cross that border. So that was like one element. The others was like, okay,
how is that possible in such so that the design allowed for that? So
they had a ladder from the ground floor which goes up to the private cabins, and you have like one private cabin here, one private cabin there. So there wasn't any need to go through them at all.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. I think some of the challenge they did have with privacy is, obviously someone wants to go to the toilet.
Oh yeah.
You're going to hear all of that. And then the other thing is exercise. They needed, I mentioned the desks in the workstations were flexible, right? You could flip them up to create more room. And to exercise efficiently and effectively in that habitat, you had to flip them up. However, you also had to send the other person outside for a walk.
Oh, really?
So it's not ideal, but on the other hand, when they chatted about that, they said it was a good thing because it just gave them utmost privacy, both for the person inside the habitat, but also for the person going on the walk.
I
Granted,
think I'd banish them for the bathroom too. Forget the exercise. It's like, I need the bathroom. Go talk to a polar bear for a bit.
yeah, go walk.
Yeah.
And again, that's a caveat of the mission in the Arctic. In the Arctic, granted, it's not easy, it's not ideal, but you can leave the habitat to go.
Yeah, space station's a bit more of an ask.
Space walks are very rarely done, and that's usually just to implement something on the space station or repair something. You can't just walk out whenever you choose. Yeah. So that's the way sometimes, like analogous environments, like extreme environments on the Earth, they can be good at representing some things, but not everything. But it's the best we have. It's the best we can work on without sending people up to space.
It's the best of the worst we can work on. Yeah. Okay. No, it makes total sense. I mean, use what we've got here to one of the things I loved watching I went and visited JPL was the way they would create these little environments that would replicate what their various rovers were having to go through and stuff. And sometimes it was literally just putting boxes together to put them in the right configuration, but there was still this sand and everything, all those little things you just don't, until you're actually in it, you just don't, you don't really think about it. Sorry, that's a silly little side thing, but they're storing food in this thing in the Arctic. Isn't that going to just attract the bears? Like, how do you?
So they ate Huel, if you're familiar with that brand. So it's like dehydrated food that you then heat up with water in pouches and bars. So it was very confined. And they never, I think they had, when they went to the Arctic, they had a container, like a sea container nearby that they stored everything and then they locked up. Okay. And they had the actual habitat was like a few hundred meters away.
Okay, all right. Because otherwise that's like an Easter cream egg for...
Yeah, exactly. So they thought very carefully of like, how do we not attract unwanted attention? Yeah. So they were very much careful about that. And then even if you think about things like going to the toilet, that's something that you need to be careful with, smells and things like that as well.
Right.
So it was a concern, but they had it mapped out with dehydrated food, powdered food, and it's like cereal bar kind of equivalents. Yeah.
So they survive, and they could survive on that. There is enough protein and greens and things in that.
Yeah, I mean, I no longer work with them, but last time I visited their office, they still ate that in the office. So clearly they weren't put off.
I love that idea. I've always loved that idea. The inefficiency of eating is something that frustrates the hell out of me.
Really? I like sitting down for a nice meal.
So do I. Too much. But the rest of the time, it's a nuisance. You know what I mean? Like I often find that it's also I either go hyper focus or completely, or I'm all over the place. But so when I go to hyper focus, I just want to just get something in me so that I'm not a grumpy jerk for the rest of the day. So I always love the idea. If I could do a pill and eat, then I tried. I was on Soylent. I tried Soylent for a while.
Oh yeah.
Which I really enjoyed until my wife pointed out that I was having Soylent and the meals. So I was putting on massive amounts of weight, just getting bigger and bigger with these, like, these are good.
You were ready for the Arctic then.
That's it. I'm ready to, wonderful.
So that's what they ate. Yeah. Right. And also because it's so compact, you can like store so many cereal bars and so much of that food that then expands when you put hot water in it as well.
Wow. Are they related to that company at all in any way, or did they get funding from this?
I think that's just a sponsorship. Yeah.
That's smart. Yeah. And to be able to prove that you can live healthily on that stuff for a long period of time.
2 months of that stuff. That being said, and this is not knocking Huel at all. When the team did get back to civilization, I think they went back to like a US military airbase. Think about what a US military airbase has at its canteen, like all sorts of burgers, all sorts of
French fries.
Yeah. I think them digging into that first burger after the mission was just
got to feel pretty good.
Ecstasy.
Yeah. I mean,
That's the thing that's interesting for space as well, because when you go up to space, your sinuses get blocked, and you don't have any gravity pushing your blood down, so that affects your body and then your head and everything that goes with it, including your sense of smell and taste. So that's why astronauts on the space station, not all of them, but like some of them have a preference for Tabasco and like spicy sauces when they're eating, because then it enhances the flavor of things.
Right.
So, I mean, again, I'm not an expert on this, but I think that's another whole thing. Like a really interesting place to work in is the food that goes to space.
Yeah, I'd love to know.
That. Yeah.
I wonder, that's something I've never looked into that. I have to look into that for sure, because that would be fun to talk to someone about that.
Yeah, exactly. Definitely. I'll try to find someone for you.
If you know of anyone, that'd be fascinating, because
it's also an issue on airplanes as well, because you're in a...
Which is why they're so salty and stuff, because they have to season the crap out of them to try to get any... Yeah, interesting.
Because I think it's the perception for sweet and saltiness in like the altitude you're at and the pressurized environment you're at on an airplane, it goes down by like 30%. Wow. So people tend to oversalt their food or oversweeten their food. I mean, they're usually salt because you don't get that many like sweet additives. But anyway, so that is a danger because airlines are encouraged to have healthy food provided,
and then they pile salt on top of it.
But they don't. But passengers do, and that's the issue.
I see. All right.
But there's interesting like tech around that. Well, not tech, but like research being done. Like umami as a seasoning apparently is a workaround.
Interesting. Which is something I'd never even heard of until I was in my 30s or 40s.
So they're looking at like umami additives for food, which is fascinating stuff. But yeah, not my area. It's just something that I read recently. And I thought, wow, that's cool. Another way you can enhance people's experiences in these kind of situations.
And so what do you want to do now? So you've done the Arctic. Were you involved in the underwater one as well? With their
very, very basic, yeah. But
that looked nightmarish to me. Absolutely nightmare. Like you're by yourself in basically a metal coffin for.
Yeah, so that was Sebastian, the co-founder. He was up there for 2 days. So I just helped a bit with the research there. So just collecting some minimal data and stuff. But I think eventually the idea that they want to do is build a bigger version of that for like a crew of 3 or 4 people for like 20 days at a time. So
I talk about an unexplored. I thought we'd be living on the bottom of the sea by now.
There is another company. I mean, again, not affiliated with these guys at all, but there's a British company called Deep. They're in Bristol. So
I love these one word.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, and they're in Bristol, so the west coast of England.
Right.
I think they're looking at designing, and building. I think they in fact have like a Pathfinder model of sorts already, where people will be able to live and work underwater.
The Sentinel system, as they call it.
Yeah,
they got to stop watching sci-fi. It's almost so nihilistic. It's like Sentinel just sounds so. Wow, let me share this because it's
go for it.
Neat looking things here. Here we go. The Sentinel system. Look at this. I mean, that's like 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea.
I'm sure they're inspired by that.
Yeah, it must have been.
I'm not sure how they're getting on. I'm not sure their timeline of events, but it's fascinating work. And like you said, like, be fascinating to see people do that, just work and live under the sea for long periods. Why don't we have an International Space Station underwater, for instance?
Well, oh my God! I mean, talk about like bringing shedding some light on the condition of the oceans and stuff. I mean, we're struggling to do that, and we're just literally scratching the surface. We're just on the top of it the whole time. So
I'm less involved with the marine side of things, but I think it's a fascinating topic. I say fascinating a lot. I need to alternate my adjectives.
Well, it is, but it is fascinating. That's why I default to awesome. It really is though. I mean, and I think it's, as you say, it's another extreme environment that mimics what we could end up having to deal with. The moons of Jupiter or whatever. Whenever we find like some ocean planet, that's
that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's what we're looking for, anyways. So yeah, it makes total sense. What are you working on now? What's the current?
I'm it's a very boring answer. I'm focusing on wrapping up my PhD. Again,
right.
On the psychology of extreme environments. I've got one more study.
So one more study of that, and then that gets. Do you have to then? Is that when you then?
Then I defend it. Then I have to defend the PhD. So yeah, hopefully this time.
It's like the worst auditioning ever. Like I've never. Yeah, I will never complain about auditioning after hearing about how that process goes. And at any perspectives, any places that you're running your own company. But
yeah, so I enjoy working with architects and designers. So obviously I mentioned the Saga Space Architects, and also looking at how I can work terrestrially. I think having worked in the space industry, I've seen how space can help Earth. With the satellites observing climate emissions and climate change and that kind of thing. Satellites are very good at that, and I've had like a new appreciation for the Earth. Also, when you look at how people like live and work on the space station, you have a grander appreciation of what you have at your home.
Yeah, and, I got a little too much stuff. Yeah,
and it's also a classic thing when astronauts come back from space, they had a wonderful experience, a lot of them. But they also, having observed Earth from above, it's called the overview effect. It's a huge cognitive shift.
I thought that was going to affect all of us when I first saw that image of sort of Earthrise over the moon. And it was so clear that this was just another planet, but was perfect for us. I thought, I truly thought we were going to see, countries, the barriers dissolve and it was just going to become one global community.
Yeah.
But instead we've gone the opposite way, which I don't
Well,
understand.
I think the challenge there is it's something that you have to experience. You have to be in that moment. I think seeing it on a picture is very moving. Of course it is. But as a psychologist, it's one thing to see it kind of like in an abstract representation on your phone or your laptop or your PC, whatever. It's another to know you're up there, to know it's so distant and so far away and you are subject to the winds of space. I think that's part of what causes that cognitive shift, as it were. But
that's interesting. So if you get enough of us up there, maybe it would change the global perspective on the world as well.
Maybe to a degree, but also
hopeful?
I think
It's a little hopeful.
Nihilistically, I mean, obviously the expanse isn't a written history, but that's also a direction we can go. Will we go towards the Star Trek direction where that happens, or will we go to the expanse?
That is the funny thing, though, isn't it? We tend to be right now. It seems like everyone missed the message of the sci-fi that they've watched. I mean, like everyone wants to live in Blade Runner, and it's like, no, you don't. The whole point of that was a miserable dystopian future, or.
I mean, talk about great design. It was such a pivotal design movement in Blade Runner was 79, right? 1979.
I'm not sure exactly.
Such iconic design and really cool design, but not necessarily something you want to live in for decades at a time.
But it's gorgeous. As you say, though, it's absolutely gorgeous.
There's a really
and it's
cool
Tokyo.
Company.
it's basically Tokyo now, right? I mean, that's
There's a really cool company called Secret Cinema. I don't know if you know them, but they essentially create like immersive experiences, and they do live reenactments of films. Again, not affiliated, but they do live reenactments of films. One of them, which I went to with my wife, was Blade Runner.
Wow!
And so before you see the film, you go into the world essentially, and they had a warehouse and they decked it out in cyberpunk style, in Blade Runner style.
Wow!
And you could you could walk around, you could grab food, and they got the details down, not from just the lighting and the neon, but down to the smell. You could go to like kiosks for food, so the entire place was smoky. Like you could like smell noodles from across the room, and it was just so immersive. Wow. And then you sit down, and you'd have the film played, but also actors playing the film out in front of you as well.
That's wild.
And again, so coming back to what you said, like people love that kind of thing. Again, I loved it. I loved visiting that world, but do I want to live in that world? That's a different question.
That's Blade Runner: The Final Cut. Is that the one you're talking about?
Yeah.
Wow. That's That's as you say. It's one of those things that I often find when I'm working or doing some coding or writing and stuff, I'll put on like a Blade Runner soundtrack, or now they have these whole sort of simulated Blade Runner soundtracks with the AI and stuff. But it's a wonderful, as you say, it's a wonderful vision of the future. It's, as you say, it's not one that you particularly want.
And that's something I'd ask a question back to you actually is, people get very much immersed and sold on these visions of the future. And they're very dystopian. I think, is that because these stories have very good conflict elements to them? Whereas, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the solar punk genre.
Solar punk.
So solar punk is just about like a very optimistic, very green future. Like we're talking about like skyscrapers designed with like very green elements. Like
I love it. I've never heard the term. It's fantastic.
It's very utopian. But I think the question that I have in mind for you is a utopian story a boring story, and we can't like relate to it as much as
I think that's a big issue
of a dystopian one.
I think that's a big issue with it, and there's always sort of an underlying kind of threat to that utopia as well. It seems that's so you need the tension. I think there's an interesting. I grew up watching Doctor Who, the Tom Baker years, and it was only available here on public broadcasting, so they had to add an educational component. So they would talk to these people afterwards, scientists and sci-fi writers and stuff, and they would sort of make these loose connections between something that happened in Doctor Who and some technology or thought, or theories that existed. And one of them was this wonderful guy called Dr. Dater. And Agne actually put me in touch with him.
Is this Jim Dater?
Jim Dater, yeah.
Yeah.
And he was saying, I got in touch and just said, "Oh, thanks so much. You inextricably bound science and fiction for me." And he got back and was like, "I'm so sorry." And I'm like, "What?" and he's like, "Well," he says, I'm very concerned that because science fiction is what it is, we've basically made science boring. Everyone wants to go, and I saw it perfectly exhibited. I did a thing with the Tech Bandits with a bunch of kids during the pandemic. We just did like an online chat and talked about stuff while they were gaming mostly. But I showed them, the landing of, I can't remember which one of the rovers landing, and they could not care less. And I realized it's because it wasn't suddenly attacked by aliens, or there was no laser battle. They've seen all of this done better in films.
Yeah.
So does that, this living in this dream world, does this diminish our desire to have an impact on a more mundane world? So
just one thing. So that the rover landing, is that one of the NASA ones when then they celebrate in mission control, like that kind of video?
Yeah. And they had they've got actual footage, they were interacting with the animations to show it as well. I mean, I was like, oh my God, they're on Mars. It was like, I was blown away by it, but they were completely nonplussed by it because they've seen all this before, with Guardians of the Galaxies included. You know what I mean? There's a danger, I think, to that. And it is frustrating to me to watch these people with the money and the power to build these things inspired by the wrong films. I mean, these films were warnings in many cases as to what the future could be. And we seem to be rushing headlong into, some people seem to be rushing headlong into it, going like, wee, so.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I'm not sure how many people were inspired by Star Trek, for instance, so like the utopian side of space exploration. But that would be the dream.
That would be the dream, because that is the utopian future. Also, and I think that a lot of technology has. I mean, the cell phone is basically because of it's the communicator, right? I mean, that's it. I mean, a lot of medical devices. I mean, I think a lot of things are inspired by the technology in Star Trek. It is weird that we don't hear more about the social aspect of it as well. I mean, the psychology aspect of it, even for that. I've got some questions. Can I dive in?
Yeah, sure.
The Happy Extruder, someone's a 3D printer, says in the selection process with all the multi-qualified candidates, do you find the redundancies process ever changing? It seems like most mission specialists know each other's procedures. Don't know what that means exactly.
Yeah,
multi-qualified candidates, do you find the redundancies process ever changing?
If they can clarify that, I'd be happy.
Yeah, maybe we could get some. Let me see if they're still in the chat. Happy Extruder, do you want to clarify that? We'll go to the next question, and then it's another one from Happy Extruder. Was there ever a case of astrophobia on the ISS or analog mission, and is there a procedure for it?
Astrophobia.
What is astrophobia? Like a fear of space, or is that?
Is it a scenario where an astronaut doesn't want to be there?
We get some tough questions today.
No,
these are the toughest questions I've ever seen.
I won't promise to know everything, the answer to everything, but I'll give it my best shot. I think so. Procedures. There definitely are procedures for individuals who lash out or act out.
Astrophobia. I'm looking up the definition of it so I can get it, so I know what it is as well. Because it's
okay, sure, yeah, that's great. But there definitely are procedures. I'm not sure how much of it is public knowledge, but I think
Stardust Air eSpace says there was a case of astrophobia in the shuttle missions.
Right.
Let's see. Open in dictionary. Let's see. Astrophobia is what? No, it just says space. That does not help me at all. Okay. All right. Well, maybe we could clarify some of those questions if that's possible.
But there definitely are procedures in regards to people freaking out. Yeah. I'm not sure if it's public.
What are they? What do you do?
I might get sued, but I can definitely.
So if I'm freaking out, if I'm going full McKay, like my character on Stargate, who is always panicking at everything, what is the procedure for something like that?
So, like a lot of things that go wrong in space, one of the fixes is duct tape.
I would be duct taped a lot.
I think it's public knowledge somewhere. So sorry if I'm breaking any protocol. It's fellow space community, but it involves duct tape and sedation, which is very brutal and very a direct countermeasure, as it were. But yeah, you would be restrained. You'll be duct taped and put against the wall until you can calm down. And if you're continuing to show displays of aggression, you would be sedated. Yeah.
Wow. And would you be sedated and then sent home? I mean, could you be sent home without?
I think it would depend on what happens when you wake up. Like you come out of your sedated state, as it were, if you continue to show your signs of aggression or if you calm down. There'll definitely be a chat on mission control, between mission control and the crew as to like next steps. And there probably is a procedure for that as well. Like to the degree of like, okay, they've hit X point of behavior, they displayed this point of behavior, it's time to send them down, and they'd have to be sent down with someone. You wouldn't send them down by themselves.
Yeah, seriously.
Yeah. So then that causes all sorts of complexities. It's like, okay, who's running the station? Who's going back down? And
so the idea basically being is there are the process to get them up there in the first place will mostly stop that from happening is the idea.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a stringent, like you've got 2 years of selection, 2 years of, well, not 2 years of selection, but like over a year of selection. You've got the best of the best, and then they're trained, and then you get to observe these people in stressful scenarios during the training itself. So you can see if there's a hint of actually maybe they shouldn't be going up. And that's not unheard of. I think that has actually happened in the past.
I feel like I've heard something about duct tape before. Yeah, I mean, that's...
Oh, it's, yeah. And again, like, so also looking at other analogous environments, such as the polar stations, there's been a lot of news over the past decade.
Oh my God, there was a recent one, wasn't there?
There's a recent one in the past few months as well. So like,
what was that about? I don't remember what that was about. There was someone was misbehaving in some way, weren't there?
Yeah, it might have been aggression. It might have been like threat of violence. Sadly, there's been things like trigger warning, like sexual assault has happened, and even there's been an instance of that in space as well. Really? So
actually, I'm not surprised at that, honestly. Given the
humans are sadly humans, they bring their problems with them, and that doesn't matter if you're an astronaut. Astronauts still have problems. I mean, that was a few decades ago. I think that was in the 90s. So that's an instance. And I think that was documented, actually. That's somewhere in the public realm of that case.
Well, and look at the environment that they grew up in as well. I mean, look at that. I mean, just look at it. My son always points out as we watch the older movies, he's like, wow, it's like, it's the movies were quite rapey in the 80s. I mean, there was this kind of horrible progression towards suddenly realizing, wait a second, we shouldn't be. Why are we?
Yeah.
This is,
I mean, it's even a problem in Blade Runner. I mean, I love Blade Runner as a film. Yeah. There is that one scene where Deckard's a little bit forceful.
Yeah, there's a lot of those things where, I mean, well, the whole 9.5 weeks thing. I mean, there was a whole, there was just, it's really weird to go back and look at some of those quite informative films for me growing up and going like, wow, this is the wrong message. Yeah, like this is.
And sadly, like those kind of incidents still happen in polar regions. I'm not sure about space. I'm not sure there's been an incident like that recently.
Well, and unfortunately, everywhere else as well. Not just you don't need to be in extreme conditions for.
Yeah, of course.
So someone was saying that the astrophobic guy was not a trained astronaut, but was put there as a mission specialist.
Right.
The old name for tourists.
There was one prominent space tourist in the 90s. Might have been him. So yeah, but that's news to me. Like again, like I don't claim to know everything. So I'd love to learn. Yeah. I'd love to learn more about that as well.
All right, let's see what else we got here. What are the biggest differences psychologically between real space missions and analog missions on Earth, and how do you account for them in training or research? Good question.
That's a very good question.
That's a great question.
Yeah, I mean, we do the best we can with the limited resources we have. So when you're in space, you're physically in space, and you're impacted by things like microgravity, which you just do not have here on Earth. The closest equivalent we have to microgravity is in like NASA's neutral buoyancy lab. So essentially a swimming pool where you get to test out a space suit and operate a space suit, and they have a mock-up of the International Space Station under orbiter as well. Then you have the sensation of somewhat microgravity, but again, physically you have that sensation. Mentally, you're in a swimming pool on Earth, and that's something you just can't change. No matter where you are on Earth, it's not the same as having microgravity in space and knowing you are physically distant from Earth. That's a completely different ballgame. With that being said, what's the equivalent? You don't research at all. So you have to do some level of research.
You give up. You just give up.
Yeah. So you try and replicate that with the most extreme environments you have on Earth. So you will send people to polar regions. Why? Because they're very cold. Space is very cold. Granted, not exactly the same, but still cold enough that if you were to spend enough time outside in the Arctic, you would die. It just happens to be a little bit quicker in space.
Right.
And then also, if you go into the Arctic or sufficiently deep under the sea, you're far away from humans. And if something goes wrong, you are by yourself. You have to handle that situation by yourself. So there's still you're still trying to recreate that element of danger that you wouldn't if you were to like put people in a room in a university. So it's a spectrum in a way. You can have people closed off in a room in a university, which, it's interesting to see how people interact and the behaviors that they display if they're locked up for like a few hours. Probably little you can get from that, but like a few days or weeks. Or you could, like in between, you can have people in the Arctic underwater where there's that threat of danger. You have all sorts of environmental constraints, be it temperature or distance from help, and that kind of thing.
Pressure,
all sorts of those kind of variables, which is like the next best thing. And ideally, the best thing is space. But because the cost of access to space is so insanely high right now, you just can't get as much research as we'd like in those kind of things. So you have to default back onto like, okay, the middle of the spectrum approach, which also makes sense, right? So not just for psychology research, but also tech demonstrations. You have technology readiness levels for, rovers, components, hardware, all sorts of things to see how they'll perform in extreme environments before, and like pass a certain bar before they're allowed to fly up to space.
Right.
So yeah.
So we're doing the same thing with humans, basically.
Yeah.
So I guess when things do get cheap enough, potentially we could have like giant training spaces in orbit somewhere. I guess that would be the dream, because then you narrow it down, then you get them actually up there, and
there'll still be some element of like stringent selection process on Earth, I'm sure. But maybe like we talked about the analogy with aviation. At some point you transition between the pioneering phase and the tourist phase, as it were. And you'll see like more people going up there to spend longer periods of time training before they get sent to the moon or Mars or whatever it might be.
Yeah, space camps, exactly. Yeah. That was Stardust was saying. Okay, what else we got here? Okay, looking ahead to Mars missions. Should we go to Mars?
Should we?
Yeah.
It's tricky. It's been so politicized. I think
it just seems like the most. Like, I understand the rovers, I understand the robotics, I understand going and studying these planets. I'm just not sure why these bags of water need to be there. We just seem like such a liability and such a huge cost in every way to get us out there.
I think from a financial standpoint, it's quite hard to justify. And again, I'm not an expert in the finance side of things. There will be people like Robert Zubrin, who has made a case for going to Mars since like the 80s and 90s.
Oh, really? Okay.
Who can probably argue why from an economic standpoint. But he was a former NASA engineer, JPL engineer, I think. But like he's got a very strong know-how. I think he's made a few cases for the economics of going there. Personally, I can't defend that. I don't think at this moment we're struggling to make a case for commercial space stations at low Earth orbit, let alone Mars and moon missions. But again, I'm biased, right? So I would like to see a Mars mission. I think it would cost a lot, but NASA's budget is incredibly low anyway. It's like 0.4%.
And getting lower by the second.
Lower by the second, exactly. So I think there is a way to make a mission cost effective, but it's the classic triangle of speed, quality, and time, right? So, okay, we can get there fast, and it will cost okay. But the quality of the mission may mean that people don't come back. Well, you can't have that. You can't have people. You can't have dead astronauts. You can't have like a Mark Watney situation.
So, although what's weird is that is how we used to explore. I mean, we used to send boats out knowing they probably wouldn't come back.
No, exactly. So, so there's a level of risk acceptability, and I think the take I have is astronauts know that what they're doing is inherently dangerous. So if people sign up to it, who show a strong psychological profile and willingness to take on those risks, why not? I'm more willing to let people of that nature go and take those risks. But the issue is when you are attached to an organization like NASA and ESA, they've got requirements, and you just can't have people dying on those kind of missions. So that's where private missions come in, but then that comes in with its own kettle of fish as well. The critics will say, okay, well, do they have people's interest at heart, or do they just have the mission's interest at heart? So that's a tricky balance to run.
And a lot of science fiction is based on exactly those things.
No, exactly.
The corporations, whether the people are important or not.
I think eventually we'll get there. It'll still cost billions, which is a lot of money to a lot of people. But in terms of like the NASA's GDP, it's still billions, but it's tiny compared to what other agencies get. It's not actually, in the grand scheme of things, it's not that much, which seems weird to talk about when you're talking about billions of money.
It'd be nice in a way if some of that military spending could get spent on space
I'll,
instead.
I'll definitely agree with you there.
Unfortunately, though, I think it will to some extent, in that I feel like space is a new
It's
new battlefield.
it's getting militarized already.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think we'll get there. And referring back to that triangle of speed, quality, and time, I think we'll get there with quality and with time. But it won't be the quickest. Like, we're getting projections from some companies for like 2028, 2029. I think that's way too soon. I think mid 30s we might be in a good spot to do it. So the next
for humans to get there.
For humans, yeah, I think 2030s is reasonable with the level of technology that's developing right now. But just take any media announcements with a grain of salt. But that's not to say never. I think never's far too strong. I mean, back when aviation was kicking off in the 1910s and 20s, I think there's a famous piece written, I'm not sure if it was a French newspaper or something like that, but they were saying man will never fly. And then a few months later, the Wright brothers do their thing. Never say impossible, but very, very tricky, very challenging. Yes. Unlikely. Yes. But technology moves so fast, so it is doable.
I guess my concern when I think about it is not so much going to Mars. It's the idea that we want to live there as an option. There's a wonderful, I can't remember the name of the guy who I just listened to a podcast, but he's written a book about it, basically just debunking a lot of these sort of grand theories of what we should be doing.
Is it City on Mars?
No. Although I think he referenced that at one point.
Yeah, so I would recommend people to read that.
Really? Okay. All right.
City on Mars, it's an interesting book. It's a realistic criticism of the challenges we face if we were to live on Mars. So there's a lot more problems than we know about.
Basically, there's nowhere on Earth, no matter what we do to the Earth, basically, there's nowhere on Earth that is more inhospitable than Mars. Mars is still much worse for survival than anything we could do on our planet.
And I think it's just the way you frame it. So if you're saying I don't think most people who work in the space industry like myself would say Mars over Earth. I think that's preposterous. I think Earth is our main planet. We should be focusing on it and looking after it.
Yeah, you want to terraform something, maybe terraform Earth.
Exactly. But that's not to say we can't do both. I think that the small amounts of money in the space industry can definitely go to the moon and Mars. Colonizing, for lack of a better word.
I know we need to come up with a better word, don't we? Because it's just so many connotations.
Settling. I prefer settling.
Yes, there you go.
But I think that's another ballgame. And again, so are we going to put like science outposts there? That seems more feasible. And again, so people like you and me, I don't know if we'll necessarily go to live there, but there will be some people who will want to. And my argument there that I do bring up to people is like, well, if people want to go, if there are some hardcore scientists, like if we reference the astronauts back in the 50s and 60s, insanely, not necessarily the best from like a team and like a teamwork point of view and like a group living point of view. But if you have people who are that hardcore about going, why should we stop them? I think.
I would never get in the way of it. I just feel like I don't have that sort of human centric approach to this stuff where I go like, I just feel like there's so many, the sensors that are available to us now, the technologies that are available will make it very, will allow us to do most of the work that humans would not be as good at doing out there anyways.
Well, for the time being, humans are pretty efficient. So like humans still repair things on the space station as opposed to robots. Right. So at least for now, the amount of data you can collect as a human on a celestial body, be it the moon or Mars, is so much quicker. And humans are also good at problem solving and improvisation. Right. So that's one advantage of having people in those situations.
Right. That's a good point.
But that also brings in a very tricky thing is the whole astrobiology aspect of it is, okay, what if we go to these places and introduce germs to the local environment? And again,
we've already crashed tardigrades on the moon. Do you hear about that?
Yeah, I have heard about that.
I was like, are you kidding me? Like, we basically already colonized the moon with tardigrades potentially.
So I don't really have a stance on that because I'm not sure how to feel about it. Because personally, I think we can do some great science with humans on Mars. I think we're quick at doing science. We're efficient. We can get some really interesting live data and analyze live data on like the history and geology of Mars, for instance, or the moon. But that comes with its problem of, okay, how do we ensure we don't, infect a planet or a moon as well? I mean, the moon's harder because it's like being battered with radiation, but the Mars has its concerns.
And further afield too. I mean, like we were just sort of dropping spaceships on planets and moons and stuff in the hopes of figuring stuff out. I mean, I think we're pretty good about the contamination side of stuff now.
I think we can sort. I think we can address that problem for sure.
Mm.
But also, I'm a psychologist. I want to see people explore. It's just the approach we take in doing it. How can we do it from a sustainable approach?
There's a wonderful, when I was getting sort of down about us in general and how we were sort of treating the planet, there was a wonderful quote. Someone referred to us as the space program is the green tendril. It's not us going to the moon. It's not us going to Mars. It's our planet extending its reach into the solar system, which I thought somehow sounded better to me than us spreading like a cancer across, which is where my head was at. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think from my point of view is like humanity is capable of great good and great evil. Yeah. So which aspects are we going to take with us when we explore? The reality is a bit of both.
Yeah,
I think no matter where we've gone, like Chris Columbus, not exactly a great ambassador for traveling across the seas.
No.
But
was lauded for many decades.
Lauded for many centuries. But also there have been peaceful excursions. So like the Polynesians, for instance, they spread across Polynesia in a fairly peaceful and sustainable manner. So what approach do we want to take? I think that's the real question. It's not, for me, it's not, I think eventually we'll reach a point where the technology is good enough that we can go to these places and it'll be cost effective to do that. That will happen. The debate is like when. Will it be in the next decade or will it take longer? But once it happens, what is the approach? That's the crux.
And I think that you raised an interesting point there, because the reality is also that we don't stop these things. Like, we can talk about what we should do to slow things down they don't slow down. We just have to start considering as soon as possible what the implications are of these things, like the AI stuff, which is going to solve everything apparently. Are you using AI at all with the psychology stuff? Have you played with that at all? Or?
Personally, not so much. No doubt others might, but personally, not so much. No.
It's fascinating. One of the things I'm also fascinated about it is people's response to it. Like just seeing the different people are already like creating little camps of, of pro and anti, and it's.
I think from my side, when I don't know enough about a topic, I'll be very open about that, and AI is one of them. So like, have I played around with models like Claude or ChatGPT? Yes, I have. I've explored. I've asked them questions. I've asked them questions related to my discipline, and sometimes there's interesting answers. Sometimes it will hallucinate papers that don't exist. So you get good and bad. But frankly, I just don't know enough, and I wouldn't want to state something from a position of ignorance. That's always my fear when it comes to topics. I just don't.
But you have no intention of incorporating it yet into what you're doing.
I think it will happen. I think there's such a big push behind it that it will likely happen. I'm not the authority figure on this, but I'm sure it could be useful in some ways. If you can get astronaut data and filter it through AI, who will tell you, okay, this is the current person, profile of mood, for instance, and recommendations. If it gets to a good enough point, that could be quite valuable. But similarly, humans are good at spotting what's wrong with other humans. I prefer the filter being a person as opposed to AI, at least when it comes to the psychology side of things.
It has to. I think all of it has to come down to and a human. I mean, maybe not as many humans. I mean, I love Perplexity. I'm using an awful lot now just to help me organize thoughts and organize searches and stuff. And the reason why I like it is that even if it does hallucinate, which I have not experienced with Perplexity, I did with ChatGPT. You've got citations, and that's what I love.
That's brilliant.
Okay,
I'll check that out as well.
Yeah, I like it. I pay for it now because I use it so much, but I don't get it to write for me, but I get it to help me with the writing, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
like,
I think a collaboration is the right approach as well.
But for searches, it's wonderful because it gives you these extensive searches with citations for everything. I can't recommend it enough. But
I'll check it out. Yeah, I don't like the idea of AI replacing humans, but an extension to humans, I can get on board with that for sure. Yeah. So it just depends how it's handled. Yeah.
Look, I remember when word processors first started and first came out, and I had an essay sent back to me by the teacher because I cheated because I typed it because I printed it out on the computer.
And that's like a parallel right now, yeah.
It's like I'm like, what? No, I wrote it. They just printed it, but no, that's cheating. You got to write it out by hand.
Yeah.
So things. I think our perspectives on these things change. But all right, what else we got? More questions here. Are you okay for time? How are you for time?
Yeah, I'm good for time. Yeah.
Okay, good. Okay. Okay. Tima Xtima A says, what's the procedure like to prevent food poisoning on the ISS? Why would you go there? The psychological aspects of people. Well, actually is a bit larger question. Maybe even how do you deal with sickness on space station?
It's tricky.
That's got to mess with people.
I mean, to quote Star Trek, "Damn it, Jim, I'm a psychologist, not a doctor or a food specialist."
Fair enough.
But no, I think I will try and address it because it'd be boring not to. Again, very, very stringent requirements set by NASA. They do a lot of prep in labs when it comes to food, and that's like a month, if not year-long process. Like qualify foods before they even get up to space. So they'll do all sorts of fancy testing. I'm not sure what the tests are. I wish I could tell you. I just know that they do test foods very stringently, and they'll have astronauts. I think they tailor the food to the astronauts. They will have some general kind of like food supplies, but they also have special food for each astronaut as well. So they'll bring astronauts in, and it's very important to have them sit down and try the food before flying up there to see if they have any reactions to the food or not.
Yeah.
And they'll also, I think there's enough research out there now to know how the space environment influences your physiology and your biology up there, that they can kind of somewhat compensate for that as well. So yeah, they'll bring people in, they'll bring the astronauts in, see how they react to the food, see if they like the food as well. And similarly, I think part of the medical process is to check that, they don't have any conditions that might impact them when they're up there. So like sickness. I mean, a lot of people do get space sick. Not everyone, but people do get space sick.
Is that like motion sickness type thing, or
it's its own thing? I think I don't know enough about it, but it's
because that would wear me down pretty fast. Like the idea
it's just
of motion
adjusting to microgravity because like your blood's pumping in a different kind of way. There isn't a gravity pulling your blood down, for instance. Your stomach has a different kind of reaction. So it's adjusting to like the nuance of being in a microgravity environment.
I'm so never going to space. Just on everything is it sounds like a nightmare to me. All right. Well, thank you for diving into something that was not.
No, it's fine. Yeah.
How does one handle sexual urges in space? Boy, we're cutting straight to it on this one.
Okay, so I think from the front end, as it were, space does not sex does not happen in space. That's probably the front end answer you'll get from a lot of space organizations. Having said that, and again, I don't want to.
At some point, it's going to have to.
Well, people are people, right? I'm sure it's already happened.
Yeah,
that's just me speculating.
Yeah.
We've had 500 plus people fly up there.
Right.
And also, like, if someone wants to find like a quiet spot, they probably
can. What does
it
matter?
They probably can. And are they going to like? This is the thing. Humans are humans, and we don't always necessarily report things that perhaps should be reported. And there's been numerous instances in space where people have broken rules. So people have brought food that they shouldn't have had to on the Apollo missions. We mentioned sadly cases of sexual assault in extreme environments and space. That's happened.
That was a badly handled sexual urge. There you go. Yeah,
exactly. So so that's a bad example. But then again, what goes unreported? Again, that's pure speculation. You won't see any evidence of that. But I think with the amount of people that have been up to space, including a married astronaut couple, I'm not sure if they were married at the time or they got married afterwards, but they were definitely. I think they were probably in a relationship at the time. Is it beyond the realm of possibility?
So your bet would be on this has already happened. There's already okay.
I think sadly, is it so much we don't know.
Is it discussed at all in the procedure of picking astronauts and stuff? I mean, is that kind of thing discussed? Does it come up?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know actually.
I think it's interesting. Well, because I mean,
it'll probably be interesting from a selection point of view. So if you are filtering a lot of participants and candidates, and
there's got to be some red flags like that you could pick up on, especially if it's like a mixed gender.
Yeah, I think it's likely like an edge case where there's probably not like huge documentation on it, but there's probably is a consideration of okay, let's not pick married couples, for instance. Even though there's also research to suggest.
I don't know if you want you don't want the single guy either, really, do you? I mean,
one of my mentors, a great lady called Cheryl Bishop. She's a professor, was emeritus professor now in psychology in Texas, medical branch of Texas, and we had some interesting chats about that. Like, do you want to send married couples for long periods of time? On one hand, they have experience living and living together in confined spaces. On the other hand, that could introduce its own what if there's affairs in space? What if that suddenly becomes a really bad situation where it's better to have like married couples flying. So it's those kind of issues that she kind of introduced me to, and I thought, wow, that blew my mind at the time. So to answer that question, there probably is some kind of like edge case scenario where that is considered.
But it's not something you've come up against.
Not something I've come up against,
Right.
not in the selections I've done.
Right.
But again, if you see people with the same last name, and we do extensive social media checks on people, we can find out on Facebook, Twitter, whatever it is, what you've shared, what photos you shared, and we can cross-reference and be like, oh, actually, yeah, these two people know each other. Which, if it comes to like a friendship, that can be potentially a good thing, because you can say, okay, these people have worked in the same environment before. That could be an advantage. But these two people are married. That suddenly gets a bit complicated. Again, hasn't come up in my experience.
Right. Interesting. But again, as you say, as these missions as we can support larger missions with more people, these are going to be things that will be, and that's where the environmental design comes in as well, right? Like you want spaces where people can feel safe and privacy, to have the privacy and stuff.
Right now, private cabins on the International Space Station are like telephone boxes. TARDIS. Well, I was going to say TARDIS size.
TARDIS, but then that would be bigger on the inside.
That's a fat lie from me.
Liar. Yeah.
But then they're like UK,
the opposite of TARDIS.
UK telephone box size.
Right. Yeah.
That's fine for one person, but if we're talking about couples visiting a space station or families like living on a space station in the far future, you can't have telephone boxes. You need to have rooms.
Yeah, and human without a million cables everywhere, and
spot on. And that's where I get excited about things like artificial gravity space stations, which Vast, the company I mentioned earlier, they're considering that, because then you remove the issue of microgravity, which makes things easier for operations in space. Like currently,
you've got some kind of a
like a wheel,
a
wheel that rotates, and that simulates artificial gravity.
Fantastic.
And that makes things easier for if you've got liquids in space. Right now, when you pour in space, it forms bubbles and floats around. It's a bit of a mess. But if you have like an artificial gravity system, it just
not a problem.
Somewhat more similar to what we have on Earth, which makes things easier. Like if you're gonna have people like us living in space, having that kind of system in place, it's more akin to what we're familiar with. Whereas as opposed to adjusting to human spaceflight, to microgravity, sorry.
Right.
And similarly, there's other considerations such as what if you cut yourself in space? What if you need an operation in space? Doing it in microgravity can get very, very dangerous. And again, the Expanse, there's a few good scenes in that series which shows the danger of a microgravity environment.
I gotta sit down and watch it again. I've read the book. I gotta read I'm behind on the books too, so I've got.
Fully recommend. So artificial gravity can help with that as well.
That's amazing. I mean, what this stuff always comes down to is, no matter how niche you think you've got, the amount of potential related topics is just extraordinary. I mean, do you drive your friends and family nuts with
Actually, well, you have to ask them. I'm the wrong person to ask.
Do you have siblings? Do you have?
I've got two half brothers.
Do you test them? Do you push them to their emotional limits all the time?
No, I like to think not. They might say yes.
I think as a brother, you're supposed. I have 5 younger sisters. So
I'm the youngest, so it goes downwards. I get the brunt of it.
We can't be friends. We can't be friends. No, that's
shame.
Yeah, the youngest. Shame. You get it so easy. The youngest. I was the oldest and the only boy of five.
Yeah, no, you guys get the hard end of the stick for sure. Look after your brothers.
Exactly. That's interesting though. So you don't find yourself in your like I know, like with film and TV, you watch a movie, you're like, oh, I see, that's how they did. You find yourself stepping out of it to see. Do you ever find yourself stepping out of a conversation and going like, oh, look at that? I very much try and separate the work and the home side of things. I try to be very aware of it. I'm sure I've annoyed family and friends talking about space before, but I annoy them all the time. I mean, that's not easy. That's not hard.
Being passionate about whatever industry you're in, I think that's a good thing personally.
I agree.
Invested in it. And thankfully, in my experience, my family and friends have been very supportive, very interested in what I do.
Well, they've got to be thrilled. You're doing you're designing the space future. I mean, that's got to be.
It's a collective effort. I'll say that much. It's a lot of people working very hard. It's not just me, for sure.
Is there anything? I mean, so we should probably wrap this up because I realize I've been keeping you talking for almost 2 hours. Okay, so thank you so much for doing this. My
absolute pleasure, David.
This is just wonderful. What are you excited about in the future? What are you seeing? Are there any sort of signs of things in the future that you're like, oh man, that is I want to.
In regards to human spaceflight?
Yeah, or whatever. Any aspects of this stuff that
I'd say a company that I mentioned, Vast. They're showing strong initiative in the design side for like human-centered design, and not just like from the jargon sense, because some people slap that label across a lot of things, but they don't actually execute on it. They'll label it, but they won't do much more. Whereas Vast, they are looking at things like, okay, how can we introduce wood into space in a safe manner? That excites me. It's cool to see new organizations, new companies tackle old challenges in new ways, and hopefully design environments that are more conducive to everyday people in space. So that's something that excites me. Yeah, for sure.
That's great. And so what would if you had given you get the PhD out of the way, you would be working at somewhere like Vast as a part
I would love to work with Vast. They'd be great. Yeah. I think overall right now, because space is still quite niche, it's a nascent industry, it's growing, especially human spaceflight. In general, I like working with creators and designers. So architects, industrial designers, that's the future I see myself in. If it's space, great, but also terrestrially. We need to build more houses on Earth. We need to build more offices and things like that on Earth.
And small spaces. I mean, Are you do you watch Grand Design?
I have in the past. I don't keep up with it as much anymore, but I love those kind of shows. I love architecture shows.
I used to love that show. Yeah.
So
there's a
stuff like that
one on Apple actually, that you might be interested in.
Love to. Yeah.
Called, I think it's either Home. I think it's called Home or House. I can't, one of the two. But it basically picks one structure, and then talks to the designer. But it's always, it's about the architecture, but it's all about the society and the interactions around it. Like, so there's like these beautiful houses designed as greenhouses in cold environments, but have huge, big open spaces so that the daughter who has physical disabilities can do her art by, you know, crawling on the ground and with paint and stuff. And it's a wonderful, I think you'd love it because it does tie the architecture to the people and to the, you know.
And that's exactly what I want to be doing in the future. It's not just working for the space side of things, but there's a lot that we can apply to both scenarios, like using the terrestrial side of things to improve architecture and design in space, but also vice versa. I think there's a lot of crossover and potential there. So I'd love to work with designers, architects, and so on.
Well, housing the homeless too would be another interesting one, because we've been experimenting with that here with these sort of little container homes where they're basically creating these little mini villages where people have a little safe spot where they can be warm and sort of protected. But how do you do that? Then what needs to be in, what kind of oversight needs to be there? And then of course you get the legality is a whole other thing.
It's a very tricky challenge to solve.
It's fascinating. Oh God, I'm so excited for you. You've got all this ahead of you. This is fantastic. How long you got on the PhD? How long you got until that's
a very classic question. The answer is I don't know, but it should be in the next year. 2036 is the year. I've got one more study to wrap up, and then put it all together in a big old document and then defend it.
And the work side of stuff, you're basically have to just hold off until that's done. That's
the decision I took this year, to just focus on the PhD. But I do freelance every now and then, so contracts come in and out, and then once they do, I readjust accordingly.
So if someone, let's say some rich nerd says, you know what, I want my new house to be designed like a space station. Or is that the sort of stuff you're doing as well? Or is it purely more the science side of stuff?
Yeah, it wouldn't just be me. I know some partners that we could all collaborate on that if that were to happen.
I could just sort of see that kind of thing happening, couldn't you? Like someone going like, okay, I got a place in Palm Springs and I want it to be basically a self-contained habitat or whatever.
So from like the human environment interaction side of things, from like the designing things for people, can definitely help out there. But like, you want to have architects and engineers involved as well, so it'd be a collaborative effort. But I've got contacts.
Well, that's great. Well, and if there's anyone else you think might want to chat about this stuff, let me know, because we're always looking for people to talk to.
Sure.
This has been absolutely amazing. How do people get in touch with you? How do people get in touch, or do you not want them to right now? Leave you alone because you're doing a PhD. I saw you have a LinkedIn. There's a LinkedIn.
I've got a LinkedIn, so if you look up my name, so Konstantin Chterev. I'm not sure if it pops up. It probably does pop up on the platform.
Let me grab it, because I think I've got it. I think it was one of the ones that actually worked when I love it when I type in the @ and the name actually comes up. It's always a nice change for me.
So they can find me on LinkedIn, and I've also got a consulting site called Xenos. That's Xenos Consulting as well.
It's fantastic. Well, that's great. Okay, and last question for you: science fiction. What are you watching?
Sure.
Anything watching right now? You said For All Mankind was one that you liked.
For All Mankind is fantastic. Andor, absolutely adored.
Really?
Yeah. I loved Andor.
I tried it. I'm gonna have to try it again.
How many episodes in did you get? Because it's a slow burn.
I got 3 in. I got 3 in. They went to they went to some green planet, and I was like, I'm out.
It's a very slow burn. Give it another shot.
Really?
The Expanse, also a very slow start, but once you get into it, it's fantastic.
Fantastic. I loved the first season, and then I struggled after that. But I also loved Jane, the guy, the lead guy in that.
Thomas Jane?
Thomas Jane, that's it. Yeah, Thomas Jane, and also, oh my God, and my favorite guy, Jared Harris.
Yes.
Jared Harris does that belter lingo, whatever it is, so well. Like everyone else was a pale comparison. Yeah. Okay, but so the Expanse.
And then finally, I've been making my wife watch Deep Space Nine, but thankfully she enjoys it.
Oh, really? Okay. Oh, good. Okay. So that wasn't too much of an effort. So Deep Space is that the one with that? Is that the one that Picardo's on? Robert Picardo?
So Picard. That's Voyager. I think that one's Voyager, which I haven't actually watched much of. But I think,
such a bad nerd. I don't watch enough sci-fi.
Oh, it's fine. There's so much out there. But Deep Space Nine is with Benjamin Sisko.
Oh, right. Okay, great. Okay, all right. Yeah. So that was one that I watched a bit of because it was just sort of on when I was unemployed. So there was that, came up a lot. All right. And book wise, any books you're liking? Any?
I read all sorts, but recently I finished Creativity Inc., which is about the organizational culture of Pixar.
Yeah.
From its foundation to present times. And I just found it interesting how you manage creative people as a growing company.
Herding cats is what we call it. Is that
fascinating? And having a creative culture, I just find that fascinating. Yeah.
It is interesting. Like, how do you deal with a bunch of basically brilliant people all together in one little place and coming up with one project? So that's interesting. Okay, no, I haven't read that one. I have to read that. Science fiction wise, I'm reading something right now. I'm trying to read again because I keep stopping it and then having to pick it up again and start again. Ancillary Justice, which is a really fun.
I've heard of that. I have heard of that.
It's fascinating because I think you might like it because the concept is basically that the ship is its people. So that what happens when a ship is destroyed, but the people remain? When they're tied to the ship, how do these people who used to be multiple become singular? And it plays with gender, and it plays with it's kind of a fascinatingly beautiful book. And like I said, I get 3/4 way through it, then I put it down for a couple months, and then I've forgotten everything, so I go back and start reading it again. So, but it was
one book I would recommend. I mean, I need to do a reread of it, but it's a very not many people have heard of it, at least in my life. It's Rosewater by Tade Thompson. So he's a British-Nigerian sci-fi writer. I
know that one. Okay.
Fantastic author. And it's about the establishment of a city called Rosewater in Nigeria. And it's it blends, sci-fi, with an alien presence and an investigator.
I've never heard of this.
And psychic abilities. It's so interesting. It's so different to the kind of things I've read before. So Tade Thompson, Rosewater. Check it out.
Is it? Yeah. So it's part of the Wormwood trilogy. Is that?
Yes. Yeah. 3 books. I believe.
Wow. Oh, fantastic! Oh, great recommends. Oh, good. So I've got more to do. Again, Konstantin, thank you so much.
My pleasure. Really absolute pleasure.
And I will wrap up. I'll wrap up. I'll stop the stream. We'll say goodbye, and then I'll let you go. But and we'll just say goodbye to Agni as well. Thank you to Agni. Thank you to Cal. Thank you to everyone for their questions. Thank you for being here. And until we geek again, I'll say be brave, be kind, be brilliant, and cheerio, and huzzah! All right, here we go.